Welcome to the Nerdstalgic podcast with your host, the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm. Nerdstalgic with the Ginger Bookworm.
Howdy beans, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast. I'm your host, Luke the Human. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're all good, as per usual. Before I begin today's topic, for today's episode, a little bit of housekeeping. So make sure that you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod to be kept up to date on everything and anything that I am doing. Also, if you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and all that jazz. And if you are subscribed, make sure you hit that bell to be notified on whenever I release any new episodes every Sunday. So that is the housekeeping done. Also, welcome back to my Studio Ghibli journey. For anybody who is new to this journey, this is where I chronologically make my way through Studio Ghibli's movies. So far, I have covered Nausicaa Valley of the Valley of the Wind, which was absolutely incredible. Like such a powerful, emotional movie, and that it's just surprised me that so many people haven't watched it. Even in the Ghibli community, so many people haven't seen it. So if you haven't seen it, check that movie out. It's incredible. And then before Halloween, I did Laputa. I always mix that one up. Laputa Castle in the Sky, which is another incredible movie, kind of in the vein of Indiana Jones meets The Lost City of Atlantis. Again, very, very incredible, very emotive. Just wow. You know, I loved it so much. And I have had such a huge, incredible journey so far. And I've only seen 2 films from this studio. And they've all blown me away. And I have had tears. I've had joy. I've had moments where I've gone. And if you haven't, go back and listen to these episodes if you haven't. Both of them are on YouTube, and both of them are on my Spotify. Go back and check them out now if you haven't. But I just have I went on so many tangents in those movies of like how powerful they were to me and how much they meant to me, and just how powerful of a message that they have and how great films they are. So so far this journey has simply been, in lack of better words, incredible. So definitely, if you haven't checked those episodes out, please do go back and check those out. But today I am going to be looking at the movie Grave of the Fireflies from 1988. This film, from what I've heard, from what people have told me, it's emotional. My friend used this word, emotional wreck. It's going to destroy me. And I'll be honest, I cry at films. I do. I cry a lot at films, especially if there's animals in them. If there's any animals in a movie, I would just bawl my eyes out and cry. I'm not afraid to admit that, movies make me cry, and this film will break me apparently. So not really looking forward to that, but it's all part of the journey. It's all part of the experience. So when I get to get around to actually watching the film, get ready for that. That's the potentiality. So me getting very, very gushy and very sort of emotive. So that's one to look forward to. So that is the movie I'm going to be watching and reviewing today. So Grave of the Fireflies is a 1988 Japanese animated war tragedy film based on a 1967 short story by, and if I butcher this name, I do apologize, I am dyslexic, Akioya Nosaka. It was written and directed by Isao Takahata and animated by Studio Ghibli. Set in the city of Kobe, Japan, in June 1945, it tells the story of 2 siblings and war orphans, Sita and Sakuko, and their desperate struggle to survive during the final months of the Second World War. Universally acclaimed, Grave of the Fireflies has been ranked as one of the greatest war films of all time and is recognized as a major work of Japanese animation. Now we're going to do my IMDb story voiceover. So for anybody who doesn't know, I like to go on IMDb and read in my best sort of voiceover voice that I possibly can do, the short blurb, short description of the movie. I like doing it. I find it funny. I don't know if other people do. No one's commented on it yet, but I'm going to keep doing it anyway because I really, really enjoy doing it. So, best voiceover impression. Here we go. The story of Sita and Siko, two Japanese siblings living in the declining days of World War II, when an American firebombing separates the two children from their parents. The two siblings must rely completely on one another while they struggle to fight for their survival. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988. Doesn't that sound heartbreaking? That is going to... I can already feel it now. It's going to break me. I know it. I'm going to be broken. I am going to be upset, um, which I'm not looking forward to at all. But it's all part, like I said, it's all part of the journey. It's all part of the fun. Before I get on to the talk about sort of the movie's development, and there's a lot to talk about in the movie's development, I'm going to do a little bit of trivia. Now, for anybody who's been listening to any of my reviews quite recently, you know that I started to trivia at the very, very end of all my sort of movie reviews. And it's kind of a way to, another sort of, it's a bit of fun for those people that stuck around to the end, but also I find it interesting to do a little bit more research into looking about these fun little quirks and that sort of thing into trivia bits about movies. I love trivia. I love a good quiz. So things like this really do fascinate me. And while I was doing my research, I found this little bit of trivia out that I thought, because it pertains to the development of the movie, it would be better suited at the introduction. Now, for anybody worried about other trivia not being at the end, I promise you I do have other trivia. Not as big as this one I'm about to tell, but I do have other trivia for those of you that enjoy it for the very, very end. But because this bit of trivia pertains to the development of the actual movie, I wanted to put it in here in the introduction. So, this film was initially distributed with My Neighbor Totoro in 1988 because it was the only way that Miyazaki could have been able to make a Totoro. The reason being that the original film pitch for that film was rejected. So they pitched a double feature with Grave of the Fireflies, and the project was eventually backed financially by the original writer of the book on which Grave is based. It often was overlooked as a film because whenever Totoro was screened first, people were left happy and did not wish to be saddened by Grave afterwards. Now that's really, really quite fascinating to me, but also it's quite jarring. I'll do the fascinating part first. It's quite fascinating because I noticed that these two films came out in the same year, and before I knew this bit of trivia, I chose to do Grave of the Fireflies first, because it was the first one that came up when you search all the Studio Ghibli movies. It's first in line and then Totoro. So I just assumed they made two movies the same year, and I didn't realise that they were actual double feature, that they were actually made at the same time, and they're actually shown at the same time as well. So I find that really, really fascinating, really, really interesting. And that Totoro, it's one of their most famous and popular and most critically acclaimed movies, but the pitch for it was declined, which again fascinates me because in hindsight, how successful that movie was. You know, whenever I ask any other Ghibli fans, what are your favourite movies from the studio, it's always My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away. And Kiki's Delivery Service comes up a lot as well from my experience of the friends I've spoke to. And it's just interesting how that film's pitch, the idea behind it was thrown to the wayside, but Grave of the Fireflies must have been a really good pitch in the way that they were going to do it, and we'll look more into that in a minute with the development, that they were like, yeah, we'll fund both these films if you make them at the same time. And I find that really, really interesting. I find it very jarring as well, because if people are saying here that they would watch Totoro first, leave happy, and then be like, I don't really want to watch a sad film afterwards. And so I'm kind of glad I chose to do Grave first, because if it's going to be as heartbreaking and sad as apparently it is, so, you know, bring the tissues. But if it's going to be as heartbreaking as everybody says it is, I would rather watch the sad movie first, then, you know, bring myself back up later when I watch Totoro. So bring myself down now, depress myself, get myself really sad now, and then when I get around to watching Totoro, be brought back up and be like, oh look, it's all good and happy, yay, So I think I made the right decision, but yeah, 2 hours of heartache. This is going to be fun. But again, like I said, we will see. I cry a lot of movies, so there's potentiality I will cry at this one. So we will see. But that little bit of trivia I wanted to add in because I found it really, really fascinating, really, really interesting. As for the actual development of the film, so there's a lot to say about the development. So there's a lot to it. And how can I explain this? Again, there were a lot of Japanese names in this, so if I get any of them wrong, I do apologize. I'm going to try my best. But if I do make some mistakes, please don't butcher me for this. So I'm going to try my best. So, into the development. So, Grave of the Fireflies author Nosaka said that many offers had been made to make a live-action film adaptation of his short story. Nosaka argued that it was impossible to create the barren, scorched earth that was to be the backdrop of his film. He also argued that contemporary children would not be able to convincingly play the characters. Nosaka expressed surprise when an animated version was offered. After seeing the storyboards, Nosaka concluded that it was not possible for such a story to have been made in any method other than animation, and expressed surprise in how accurately the rice paddies and townscape were depicted. Iso Takahata said that he was compelled to film the short story after seeing how the main character, Sita, was, and he quotes, was a unique wartime ninth grader. Takahata explained that any wartime story, whether animated or not animated, tends to be moving and tear-jerking. I completely agree with him there. And that young people developed an inferiority complex where they perceive people in wartime eras as being more noble and more able than they are, and therefore the audience believes that the story has nothing to do with them. Takahata argued that he wanted to dispel this mindset. When Nosaka asked if the film's characters were having fun, Takahata answered that he clearly depicted Sita and Satoko had substantial days and that they were enjoying their days. Takahata said that Satoko was even more difficult to animate than Sita, and that he had never before depicted a young girl at the age of 5. Takahata said that in that respect, when you make the book into a movie, Satoko becomes a tangible person, and that 4 years old often becomes more assertive and self-centered, and try to get their own way during that age. He explained that while one could have a scene where Sita can't stand that anymore, it is difficult to incorporate into a story. Takahata explained that the film is from Sita's point of view, and even objective passages are filtered through his feelings. Takahata said that he had considered using non-traditional animation methods, but because the schedule was planned and the movie's release date and the staff assembled, it was apparent that there was no room for such a trial and error approach. He further remarked that he had difficulty animating the scenery since in Japanese animation, which I didn't know this fact, again, very, very interesting, one is not allowed to depict Japan in a realistic manner. Animators often travelled to foreign countries to do research on how to depict them, but such research had not been done before for a Japanese setting. Most of the illustration outlines in the film are in brown instead of the customary black. Black outlines were only used when it was absolutely necessary. Color coordinator Michio Yasuda said that this was done to give the film a somber feel. Yasuda said that this technique had never been used in an animated film before Grave of the Fireflies, and it was done on a challenge. Yasuda explained that brown is more difficult to use than black because it does not contrast well as black. Takahata insisted on working with well-known animators, Yasushi Kondo, who was working for Neopo Animation at the time, Yuzuki Mozo. Both animators played a pivotal role in creating fluid, realistic animations of the characters in the animation. Takahata drew from his personal experience to create a realistic depiction of the air raid on Okinawa. In an interview, he criticized TV shows and movies that had been recreated images of incendiary bombs. He said, and I quote, "They include no sparks or explosions. I was there and I experienced it, so I know what it was like. The film features oh no, sorry, not that part. I've skipped that part. The location and background in the film is based on a style created in the 18th century Japanese artist Hiroshige and is follower Hergé, who created Tintin. Film critic Roger Ebert explains the contrast of the style of the background in comparison to the cartoonish animation of the characters. He claims that there is an unusual amount of detail in the evocative landscape, while the characters are a take on the modern Japanese animation with childlike bodies and enormous eyes. The depiction of Sita and Tsutoku Ebert believed that his deliberate animation style embodies the true purpose of animation, which is to create the raw emotion of human life by simplifying reality to emphasize ideas. He concludes his analysis with saying, "Yes, it's a cartoon, and the kids have eyes like saucers, but it belongs on any list of the greatest war films ever made." According to Wendy Goldberg, Takahata's film also includes criticism of the emphasis of nationalism in Japan. In the particular scene, Sita's desire to join his father reflects a national fantasy of war, which leads him to neglect his sister. Yeah, wow. So that was a lot. That was a lot, and I do apologize if I butchered anybody's name. There was a thing here that I wanted to mention, but I don't seem to find it. No, I can't find it. Nah, it's gone. Ah, bugger. There was a part that I wanted to mention. Basically, they remade this film in the live action in 2005, but it's told from the aunt's point of view. I've never watched it. I think it's incompletely in Japanese. I don't think there is an English version, but that doesn't bother me. As long as they've got English subtitles, I would happily watch it. But yeah, they remade this movie in 2005 in a live action. I'm guessing by that time, because how good cameras got and how good CGI and stuff like that got, that it was more possible to make this sort of film in live action compared to having to just do it in animation. But the live action version is told more from the aunt's point of view. I did remember reading it somewhere, but I can't seem to find it in my notes anywhere. But I just wanted to add that bit here at the end because I found that part also really, really interesting. But yeah, so that is the introduction of Grave of the Fireflies. I'm going to go off now and watch the movie. Again, I can feel it already. I haven't watched this movie, but from reading the development and reading the bits of trivia and doing my research and talking to all my friends that have watched this film, and each one of them basically makes it out plain as day. This movie is going to break you. I'm a huge history buff. I know a lot about sort of the Japanese war with the Americans and then how sort of what happened when the bomb, the nuclear bombs were dropped, and the bombings of Japanese cities and civilians. So I already know the history there anyway. So I'm not going in like new or fresh, but as I do with anything, any game, book, movie, TV show, whatever, I always go in empty. No matter how much I know about something already, I try to go in empty and try to experience it for what it is, not for what I think it will be. So I'm going to go in empty. Wish me luck, because I have a feeling at the end of this, I'm going to cry. So yeah. So without further ado, I can't put it off anymore. I'm stalling on purpose. I'm trying to put it off, but generally I've got to do this, right? So the introduction is done, Luke. You've got to go do it now. So I'm going to go off and watch Grave of the Fireflies. I'll catch you in a minute. Wish me luck. So, I've just finished watching Grave of the Fireflies, and I'll be honest with you, as I do with most of my reviews, I always do the introduction first. Um, and I had planned after the introduction to sit down and watch this movie. But again, I'll be completely honest, I was scared, and I put it off. I was like, no, I'll go play Starfield, and or I'll get around to it. And I kept putting it off because I just was like, I again, it might sound stupid, but I just didn't want to be heartbroken. But finally, I was brave enough, and I sat and I watched it and it did just that. It broke my heart. It did. I was crying at the end. I'm almost going to start crying now, to be honest. Again, just remembering it. Um, I'm glad this movie is only an hour and 28 minutes because I don't think I could sit through a whole 2 hours of that film. I really don't think I could have. In the time that we had with it, it made me laugh. It made me cry. Um, you can probably hear it in my voice now that I do feel quite emotional still. I haven't not long finished watching it, and I just sat there and I just listened to the music of the end credits, and I just thought about the characters and what they went through. It's horrific. Um, so sad. I don't. Again, I don't. I don't think I could have sat and watched this movie again. Most of the time when I've so far been watching the Studio Ghibli films, I watch them twice because how long they are and how much detail is in them. That two showings is enough to really grasp everything or as much as possible. But because of the subject matter of this movie, I don't think I could sit and watch this movie again like tomorrow. I think this is one of them films that you watch like once a year, you know, just to kind of like with other sort of sad movies, you watch them maybe once a year, come back to them, remember what happened, and then you go on, and then you come back a year later, and you do it again. Um, Heartbreaking, really, really heartbreaking. Uh, yeah. Sorry, I'm feeling quite emotional. I've got my notes in front of me, but I can just see the end scene in my head still, and it's making me emotional. Right, breathe. Okay. Right. So, one thing I wanted to mention before I get into the actual proper review side of it all, um, I want to talk about history and that it's only told by the winning side. And there is a point to this, and I will smartly try to find my way back to the review. Um, for anybody who doesn't know, anybody who is not new to the podcast, I'm a history buff. I love history. I've always loved it. I've read a lot of history books. I loved it in school. I wanted to study it when I got to uni and college, but I went on to do computing instead. Well, I'm a huge history buff. I really, really am. Specifically, the part of history that I'm most interested in is the World Wars, World War One, World War Two, um, and when I was younger, when I had that initial sort of fascination with all of history, not just the world wars, um, it never really occurred to me as to who writes history, who decides what is written down and what is dictated for the rest of humankind of what happened, which is kind of odd for me because teachers didn't like me in school because I was very much one of them children who, instead of sitting there and going, "Oh, yes, that must be true," I'd sit there and be like, "Why? That doesn't make sense." I'd question everything, and I strongly implore anybody listening to this, no matter how old you are, um, or if you have kids, to question everything, um, and to make up your own decisions. That's one thing I will recommend for everybody, anybody. Um, but when it came to history, when I was younger, I never questioned it because why would you? It was history. It happened. I can't question something that happened. But as I got older, um, it got to the point where I started to question history. I started to question sort of why is it that we only see one side of the coin? And why do we only see one side of history? We don't see the other side of history. And as it pertains to the First World War, Second World War, and as this movie, um, this film is told on the opposite side of the coin. We especially here in the West, whenever we get told the side of history, we get told the side of we won and we're the heroes and we're the victors. And you could. I'll leave it for another history podcast to debate if we really did win or not. But you always get the side of the victors. We on the West, because we won, we wrote what happened. We wrote what what they experienced, what they went through. And the they being, the Germans, being the Japanese, anybody who's on the losing side. And this is something that's happened all through history. This is not just something that's modern. It's happened all through history. The Greeks and the Romans did it all, and we did it in the Middle Ages. It's always happens. Whoever wins the fight writes about the fight, and always you make yourself sound better, more grander than you probably were, because again you have the right to do that because you won. Um, but one thing that, as a history fan of myself, and I not as a history fan, but I implore people to do this themselves. Go out and actually look for things that don't fit the norm of what you read in history or what you're told in history class. That is, for example, I haven't read this book yet, and I haven't seen the Netflix TV movie that they did for it. But All Quiet on the Western Front is a book set in World War One, and it focuses mainly on the Germans and their experience in the trenches and what they went through. Um, and again, my question was always, as I got older, was the fact of, well, what did the Germans go through? What did the Japanese go through when when the British was retaliating from the bombing of London? And the Germans were being bombed in Berlin, did they have their own version of the Blitz? What did they go through? What were their experiences? Were they down in shelters and in the underground? Were they having moments of camaraderie and trying to come together and sort of calm people's spirits and playing music and just trying to get through it? And those are bits of history that you don't really hear about, to be honest. And those are the parts of history that fascinate me the most. So I used to seek out those sort of stories. Haven't got around to reading that book yet, but it is on my list, and I will get around on it eventually. One book I have read, which again, it's one that I recommend everybody reads, but I don't recommend people read it as well because it's not an easy book to read. It's one that took me a long time to read it, and I had to take so many breaks. Like I've never had a break so many times with one book. But that book is The Rape of Nanking. I won't go into context. I won't go into any specifics. If you've read that book or you know of it, then you know what it's about. But the long and short of that book is the sort of the Japanese, how they treated the Chinese during the Second World War. Won't go into full specifics about it. But that is a book, and so is one sort of All Quiet on the Western Front. Those are two books to tell the story on the side of the losers, really, of the people that lost. And those are the stories that we don't hear about. And same with the short story that this film is based off. It's a story of the Japanese, how they were struggling while being firebombed during a time. And I have much love and respect for these stories because we need more of them. We need to see both sides of each coin because that's the human story at the end of the day. you know. And for that, I have much respect for this movie. I have so much respect for it because of the story that it tells. And I don't know how I'm going my best to articulate my feelings of this movie, but I'm going to try my best. But I just wanted to start this review just mentioning the side of, we need more stories that are from the other side. We need to best understand not just the war, but to understand human nature and to understand humanity and the struggle. It's easier if you understand what the other side went through as well as what your side went through. Because again, history is only told from the winning side, and that was just the thought that went from my head constantly as I was watching this movie. Was the fact of you don't hear about any of this stuff. You might, if you are into history, you probably could find books about it and documentaries about it, but actually how they lived and how they struggled and what they went through, you don't really hear about that much. So I'm glad that you have films like this and that they are recognized as being one of the greatest war movies of all time. Which again, now I've watched it, I completely agree with that. It's up there with Saving Private Ryan, if you like Fury, Hacksaw Ridge. Like it's up there with some of the best uh, history, not even history movies, but like great war films that I've ever watched in my lifetime. Um, but sort of moving on to the actual review side of it now, the story and the characters. So the story follows Sita and Sekuto, which is I've always found it kind of funny how I butchered the names in the introduction, and it's not until I hear their names being said in the actual movie that I can then pronounce them. It's just how my brain works. Trying to read it always struggle, but as soon as I've heard the name being said over and over again, I can usually pronounce it. So I always find that quite funny. Um, but it's a story really about them two. Basically how um, Sita is trying his best to give his. They're trying. How can I explain this? He tries his best to hide his sister from the truth of their reality. You know, you can't. He can't hide her completely from it all. Like she is going to see the bombings. She's going to experience the death. You know, you can't hide her from that because she's going to see it. Um, but he tries his best to make sure she keeps her innocence, that she still sees the love and enjoyment in the world, and that no matter how much chaos and how much um, death there is around them, that you can still have you can still live, you know, you can still enjoy life. And there are many moments in this film where they'll be off playing on a beach or, you know, laughing and joking, what everybody just kind of, because again, everybody else is very sort of, you know, somber, and everybody else is just trying to, like, they've the whole realization of what's going on has hit them so much that when they hear somebody laughing and joking, it's very serious. People stop and stare and look while them two are running off, you know, enjoying themselves and trying to make the most of being young and being innocent. Um, so many people just stop. There's so many scenes where people just stop and stare at them and just give them that look of like, I don't understand why you're happy. It doesn't compute with them. And oh God, you know, it's probably one of the most powerful parts of it, where you can see that Sita, he's struggling to feed his sister. He's struggling to keep her happy. He's struggling to be a big brother. Like he's lost. Like there's nothing left. You know, they've lost their home. Their aunt was being horrible and kicks them out. So they basically try to make their life on their own, and it's a it's a real struggle. Like I'm trying to not give spoilers, but at the same stage, it's kind of hard not to because it's such a short film and there's so much happens in such a little amount of time. Um, but it is very much this story, and the two characters, the two main characters, Sita and Sekuho, um, they try to stay young and enjoy life in their own little world, while the rest of the world is at war. So everybody else is, you know, where there's death everywhere, there's death on the streets, there's cities that have been bombed and destroyed. um, their mother, she dies at the very, very beginning, so they're on their own. Their aunt is really mean to them. They struggle to find food, and everybody else was struggling to find food. Like there was so much food rationing, and there wasn't a lot of food to go round. Especially with the Japanese at the time, a lot of the food they had was going to the front line to feed sort of the soldiers. So everybody else was really struggling for food, and with the bombing raids and all that, a lot of people didn't have anywhere to go, and there was dysentery, and there was a lot of death, and there was bodies just everywhere. Again, you know, if you're interested, um, go. I'm trying to think. I did have a book and a documentary in my head then, but I lost it. But yeah, just search anything to do with the Japanese during the Pacific operation, and you'll see how the Japanese people actually how much they struggled. And I think because I have such an interest in history, and because I know quite a bit about this time period, and the struggles that they went through, that this movie hit harder for me because I'd read the books, I had seen the documentaries, I'd seen the actual footage, and I've seen the pictures of how people actually were during this time period. Um, that hit harder for me because I know what was happening in certain events, certain times, um, what battles were being fought, and to some extent what cities were in conflict and what cities were destroyed and weren't. Um, and I was waiting for it. I was waiting for like the sort of the atomic bomb to be dropped. That's what I thought was it was leading up to. I was waiting for them to go to a city, and that was be the city that would be one of the bombs would drop on. Um, but that doesn't come, and I'm glad that doesn't because I think that would have killed me more than the ending that we got, to be honest. Um, but when that is mentioned, you can kind of see how things start to go back to normal a little bit. And now that after the Japanese surrendered, how rationing became less and less, how people had more food, but it was too late. And yeah, it hurt. It hurt a lot. Also, recently, last month, I finished reading Anne Frank's book, and The Diary of a Young Girl. If anybody hasn't read it, again, another book I highly recommend. I sort of recently finished reading that, and that one's a hard-hitting book, especially if you know your history, you know what the dates of what happens in certain places, um, and then just how that book ends. It just ends, and it's heart-wrenching. That when you read a book like that, or you see this movie, and again, if you like history, it hits home a lot more so that you're like, oh, I know what's coming. I know the struggle. It's not going to end well. And it's hard. It really, really is. Especially how this movie starts difficult. And it's one of those, like, once it's not until you've seen the movie that the beginning makes more sense. And the beginning is more heartbreaking than the end. But the end is just as heartbreaking as the beginning. I can't put into words to make that make sense. Just if you've seen this movie, that will make sense to you. Um, there's no other way I think I can kind of really go into that. But like the themes and the setting, the depictions of firebombing, the depictions of suffering, the depictions of starvation, um, it was all simply heartbreaking. And and going back to what I said in introduction, I can understand why the author of this story was like, there is no other way to tell this story and to visually show the effects it had on people and the firebombing and all of that. There was no way you could do that in live action for the time, and the animation or anime was the only way that that was possible. And I completely agree. Um, I am still interested of watching the live action version of this movie from 2005. I might do a review on it, I might not, but I won't be watching it anytime soon. Most likely it'll be next year, now because I've got a lot, a lot to do for sort of November and Christmas. Um, but it's the depictions are so well done, and the art style, and everything just hits home so much more, and the music, oh, the music is just heart wrenching, and then you have the music in certain scenes, and it's joyous, and then it's the music tells the story so well. Like you have moments where you have the two characters, Sita and Sakako, where they're having fun and enjoying, and the music's heartfelt and lovely and beautiful, and there are times where they have the grass starts to grow, and you have that very environmental feel where the grass and the fireflies are going around the flowers, and there's animals and all kinds of creatures in the water, and they're living happy sort of their own little life. And then when it hits hard, hits hard, but it doesn't change drastically. It's somehow the sadness and the happiness was in tandem all along, and that the sadness was in the happiness feel of the music, and because it was always there. So when it does transition to from happy to sad, it's almost like it was always being played. You don't even always sense it from going happy to sad. It just happens so seamlessly that um, you just go from being happy to being, oh God, you know. Um, this, yeah, this is a hard review. It really is. I'm gonna leave a lot of this in. I ain't gonna edit a lot of this out because this is again how I feel, how this movie's made me feel, and that's sort of the genuine side of it. Um, but yeah, the themes and the setting were really well done by the animators here. They really got the setting 100% correct. There were certain scenes that I had to sit and go, I've seen that scene before, like bombed out cities. I've seen that sort of scene in like a black and white photo before. I don't know if it's the exact scene, but I've seen predictions like that in real life of what it actually looked like. So it hit hard for me in certain scenes. I was like, yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that scene. That actually was a real place or modeled after a real place and event. Um, so it was really difficult. Really was. Um, so heartbreaking. Really so much. But before I get to my overall thoughts, before I get to that point, before I sort of wrap everything up, I did promise a bit of trivia, and I have got a bit of trivia. For anybody who's still here, who I haven't bummed out and upset, and it got anybody emotional. For those of you um, who was interested in the trivia and who was still here, this bit's for you. So, produced concurrently with My Neighbor Totoro in 1988, many of the animators had trouble remembering which film they were animating. In South Korea, the release of the movie was postponed indefinitely because of the concern that the movie somewhat justified Japan's role in World War II. Um, we have Iso Takahata was the only living animator involved on the project who had survived the bomb blasts. And finally, this one's a bit longer. NTV in Japan produced a live action version of Grave of the Fireflies in celebration of the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. The made for TV movie, Grave of the Fireflies, in 2005, began airing on November the 1st, 2005, at 9 o'clock in Japanese time. Like the animated version, the movie focuses on two siblings and their struggle to survive the final days of the war in Kobe, Japan. However, unlike the animated version, the movie tells the story from the point of view of their aunt, and it deals with the issues of how a wartime environment could change a kind woman into a cold-blooded demon. That version stars a famous Japanese celebrity and actress, Nanako uh, Masasuma, as the aunt. Um, so that's a bit of trivia for you. Yeah, I didn't really go into much detail about sort of the aunt, but the aunt does go really mean. Um, Not a lot mean, but very sort of unfair and not very nice. And again, I don't want to go into spoilers, but I feel like that the way that the aunt treats them and what that means for them to and what they then decide to do, sort of go off and sort of live their own life in a way, um, led to some of the biggest heartache. And at the end of the film, I sat there and I thought, should they have stayed or should they have left? Would things would have been easier if they had stayed? Would certain things would have happened if they had stayed without instead of choosing to leave? Um, and again, it's one of those questions up in the air. We will never know the answer to it. But that's the sort of trivia for you. As for my overall thoughts and feelings, God, how do you begin to quantify sadness and trying to stay innocent in a time where innocence is being washed away and corrupted? How do you sort of quantify that into an overall feeling? Uh, Overall, like I'm gonna try my best, right? So overall, this movie is heartbreaking. Really is. It's probably one of the saddest movies I've seen this year. It's probably one of the greatest war films I've seen. Um, it's one that I. It's like The Rape of Nanking. It's one of them things that I recommend everybody experiences for the story and for the events and to understand what happened. But at the same stage, it's the fact of It's hard. It'd be a hard one to recommend. And I can see now why a lot of Ghibli fans I've spoke to don't talk about this movie, and they don't talk about it because it's bad. They don't talk about it because it's difficult. Like how would you recommend a movie like this to somebody, knowing full well it would upset them, and it would really be very heartbreaking to people. How do you recommend that? So I re- I recommend it if you feel strong enough. If you feel you are strong enough to watch a movie like this, again, it's only an hour and 28 minutes. But that being said, it's a very hard hitting hour and 28 minutes. It's beautiful at times. It's funny at times. Well, say funny, it's charming. It would be a better word to use. There are times where it make you smile, but there are times where it will make you cry. And there are times where you would just go silent. And for me, I stopped breathing at one stage. And I'm not exaggerating. Generally, I stopped breathing. I had to kind of breathe back. Like, no, like, when I ended up yawning, and it wasn't because I was tired. It was because I was forgetting to breathe. My body was like forcing air in. It's like a natural reaction of like, because I was just so enthralled of what was going on in a certain scene that I just forgot to breathe, and I had to go, oh, God, okay, I need to breathe back now. And that's a common thing that happens whenever I get into a film. I get really sucked into a film. I forget to breathe sometimes. So again, I don't recommend it, but it's something that I do. So yeah, it's not one I can easily recommend, but if you feel strong enough, and it's one of them sort of things that you either want to watch all of the Ghibli movies like I am, or if you want to at least try to experience it, that is one I can recommend. Otherwise, this one is something that you can miss. But I still would say, even though I'm saying that, I would still say don't miss it, because the story it needs to be heard and needs to be told, and people need to be aware of this story. Um, Most definitely. As for sort of the setting and the themes and the characters, all done fantastically well. It's absolutely beautiful. It's gorgeous. I loved the animation here. The way that they use, instead of using, because a lot of anime that I'm starting to learn, they use a lot of black shading outlines around characters to give characters and certain objects a bit more pop. Everything here was done using sort of brown. Actually, I think I've got some trivia here about that. One second, I've got it. I'm sure I wrote it down in my notes. I think I added it into the introduction. One second. There you go. Most of the illustration outlines in the film are brown instead of the customary black. Whenever black was used, it was only used when it was absolutely necessary. Color coordinator Michio Yasuda said that this was done to give the film a softer feel. Yasuda said that until that point, it had never been used in an anime before, and it was done on a challenge. You explained that the brown is more difficult to use than black because it does not contrast as well as black. And again, I love that choice. I love that bit of detail that they decided to do that. They'd never been done before, but they decided to do it. It's just wonderful. So my overall thoughts and feelings is this one's heartbreaking. It is. If you're going to watch it, bring tissues, um, and try afterwards. Try to find something that, a movie or book or a TV show or a song or something afterwards to bring yourself back up, um, because you are going to probably be very down after watching this. So try to find something that's going to bring you up afterwards. And if you're feeling down, or if you're a bit distressed about what you see, then talk to a friend. Don't sort of struggle on your own, and reach out to people, because it is a hard hitting film, and again, no one should struggle for something like this after experiencing something like this on their own. Um, but yeah, so that is my thoughts and feelings of Grave of the Fireflies. Absolutely fantastic movie, really, really is so hard hitting, and I can understand now that bit of trivia where people, because this movie was made at the same time as My Neighbor Totoro, and they were double features. So imagine going to see My Neighbor Totoro, which, from all intents and purposes of what I've been told, is one of the most joyous, happiest, wonderful movies ever made. Having to watch that first and just feeling joy and lovely and happy, and then going to get some snacks, coming back to watch the second film, only for that second film to be Grave of the Fireflies, and then to be brought down. I can see why a lot of people would stay for Totoro and leave and not be able to sit and watch this movie, because it is hard hitting. So I understand where they're coming from now, and it's still quite crazy to me, the idea that these movies were shown together. Um, it's quite crazy, but it happened. um, but I am going to definitely need to watch My Neighbor Totoro. Not now, but I'll watch it hopefully soon to sort of bring me back up to. But again, Studio Ghibli, they've done it again. Smashed it out of the park. Really, really have. They were ahead of the game. Still are. I haven't watched any of the newer stuff, but still are ahead of the game. I saw the trailer for the new movie. Can't remember what it's called, but the newer film that's coming out. And it looks good. Looks really, really good. So they're ahead of the game. They were doing amazing things. Simply incredible. Anyway, that has been my thoughts and feelings on Grave of the Fireflies. If you liked it and if you want to hear more from me, then follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod. You can find the Nerdstalgic podcast basically anywhere and everywhere that you can find podcasting platforms. The only place you won't find me is Apple Podcasts. You can also find me on YouTube. Just type in the Nerdstalgic podcast and you'll find me there. If you are listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really want to hear people's views and opinions on this movie and what they thought of my views and opinions. If you agree or disagree, if you like this movie, if it crushed you as much as it crushed me, let me know. I really do want to know. I'm genuinely interested. And yeah, so thank you very, very much for listening. I hope I haven't depressed anybody and upset anybody. If I have, I strongly apologize. But I've been your host, Luke the Human. You've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye bye.